In keeping with the extremely well-structured and educative presentations by our experts from London, we now have a power-packed session comprising 4 presentations from 4 megacity regions: Toronto, Jakarta, Tokyo, and Seoul. Professor Robert Young from the University of Western Ontario will present the Toronto story. He'll be followed by Marco from the Rujak Center of Urban Studies, Jakarta. Professor Andy Thornley from LSC will share his knowledge about the Tokyo experience. And Professor Mike Douglas from the National University of Singapore will make a presentation on Seoul. This session is chaired by Ms. Sheela Patel, who is the director of SPARC, an advocacy group for pavement dwellers of Mumbai. We also have an extremely knowledgeable panel to comment on these 4 presentations. We have Ms. Vandana Chavan, who is a Rajya Sabha MP from the Nationalist Congress Party of India. Mr. V.K. Pathak, who is a former Chief Planner, MMRDA. Mr. Sanjay Ubale, MD and CEO of Tata Realty and Infrastructure. And Mr. A. Srivatsan, who is the Deputy Editor of The Hindu. Given the fact that these 4 city presentations will be highly interesting and yet exhaustive, we will first have the presenters from Toronto and Jakarta. This will be followed by the comments of our panelists and a floor discussion. This will then be followed by the presentations for Seoul and Tokyo. Thank you. Can I just request Bob Young to come up and take the floor, please?
Thank you very much. Great. Well, honorable elected politicians and colleagues, I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to thank the organizers at the Center for Policy Research, especially its chairman, K.C. Srivatsan. I'm always pleased to be in his company, not only because of his keen intellect, but also his very fine sense of humor. I'd also like to thank the staff for various logistical help. And so I'm here to give an account of the Toronto experience, the Toronto city region. I won't take too long because Toronto is a relatively small city region. Of course, as we'll see, much depends on how one defines the region. So I will try to be succinct, and I'll try as ever to follow the 2 rules of my presentations, which are laid down by my wife. 1, say something that someone at least might find useful or at least thought-provoking. And 2, don't make an ass of yourself. So what I'm going to do first is to give a basic context for Toronto very briefly, to talk about the creation of Metro Toronto, which probably is the only time that the government of Ontario, the province in which Toronto is located, and the representatives for Toronto actually thought outside the box, as we've been encouraged to do here. I then want to talk about the amalgamation of Metro Toronto into a single-tier city, or an entity that, as its opponents called it, the megacity. This led to pressure of the kind that we've seen in many other big cities for more powers. And then I want to talk briefly about the current way of thinking about the Toronto city region, which is a very expansive vision of the greater Golden Horseshoe, and then I'll try to reach some conclusions. So the context. In Canada, unlike even the situation in the United States where there's home rule, municipalities are constitutionally creatures of the province. They are established and created by the provincial level of government. Each province has a municipal act which lays out the powers and functions of the municipalities in the province. And in the case of Canada, the involvement of the federal level of government in the municipal sector is relatively small and sporadic at best. There's very little federal involvement with municipalities. The context for the City of Toronto within the Ontario context is very simply, it always has been, to be run in a business-like manner, to be competitive, to keep tax rates low, to provide services efficiently, and to build up, if possible, the human capital, taking care of the inhabitants of the city. So here's the Canadian situation. It's a large country. It is, as someone said, one of the land-rich countries. Ontario sits right in the middle. It's often thought of as the heartland of the country. Toronto is at the southern extremity of Ontario, fortunately, otherwise it would be even colder. And the great innovation in North American terms around Toronto was the creation of Metropolitan Toronto, a two-tiered system, a true metropolitan government, one of the very few that have been created in North America. The City of Toronto itself in 1950 was a piddling little place, really negligible in any large scheme of things. However, in the census metropolitan area, Toronto, and in fact the entire region, has witnessed fairly explosive growth over the past 60 years, with the population increasing normally by about 50% in every 50 or 30% in every 10-year period, and this is persistent. The major cause, of course, is immigration, originally from rural areas and now from other countries. So the CMA itself is around it's 6 million at the moment. In the early 50s, the suburbs, which were the burgeoning areas of growth around Toronto, were simply not in an economic position, a fiscal position, to pay for the services that were required by a burgeoning population. The city itself requested to amalgamate the suburbs, but for political reasons, the provincial government and one of its agencies refused, and instead created Metro Toronto, where the city is the small block in the middle of the diagram here, and there were 12 other municipalities that became part of Metropolitan Toronto. So the metropolitan government, the upper tier government, provided trunk water services, trunk sewers, arterial roads, all the big heavy-duty infrastructure that the individual municipalities could not manage. It provided public transit. It had joint authority over housing and planning. And very importantly, it was able to borrow money. It was the only authority that could borrow money. So the basic structure, and we haven't heard too much about taxation here today, but the basic structure was an unusual one in which the city had 50% of the councillors on Metro. It had 57% of the population, and yet it provided 62% of the money. So Metropolitan Toronto was seen by its detractors, many of whom were in the central city, as a device to suck money out of the center and use it to pay for infrastructure in the suburbs. It was, to put it politely, the financial anchor of Metro. Metro Toronto's creation was also accompanied by the institution of a large number of special purpose bodies to run schools, housing, engage in planning, conservation authority, and a transit commission that was meant to provide public transit for the whole metropolitan region. This shows the planning committee, the planning commission's area of purview. So although Metro Toronto is the area enclosed in the heavy line, the planning commission was actually active outside the boundaries of the city. And this is always the case. It has always been the case in the whole evolution of Toronto. There was only one reform that was significant over the course of the Metro's history. The 12 municipalities were combined into a total of 6, and direct election was made for Metro Toronto councillors who previously had been indirectly appointed to the Council of Metro. Now, as time went by, other metropolitan authorities were created across the province of Ontario, 11 in total. So this federated structure was reproduced widely within the province of Ontario, despite its political unpopularity. This effort eventually stopped, but it had acquired a head of steam, and in the late 60s and into the mid-70s, these metropolitan authorities were created in many parts of the province. So, in 1997, the metro municipalities were amalgamated into a single city. So the city of Toronto was reborn with much larger boundaries. The reasons were a continuing increase in immigration, increasing disparities. The city residents were paying a disproportionate share of the costs of Metro Toronto. There was severe disagreement over transit planning. The suburban areas wanted roads built, and they still do, and people in the central city wanted mass transit in the form of subways and trams. And so Metro as a structure became decreasingly popular, and the provincial government, a so-called progressive conservative government, took a bold decision to simply amalgamate all of Metro Toronto into one city. This was part of a neoliberal economic platform that this government was elected on, the so-called common sense revolution. It was a very odd government by Ontario standards. It sought to cut social welfare and education spending, deregulate just about everything that the provincial government had authority over, and it wanted to cut transfers to municipalities, and the amalgamation of Toronto was a way of doing this. It was a very quirky decision to proceed to the amalgamation. Part of this had to do with the globalization imperative. It was said that the premier of the province had been to conferences and was told that the only thing people knew about Ontario was Toronto, and so he decided to follow through and create a Toronto that could be, quote, globally competitive, unquote. Many citizens of Toronto were very upset about this development, but the government pushed through. It was a strong government. It also went through amalgamations in many, many, many other municipalities in the country, so that the total number of municipalities was reduced from over 800 to about 450. So sweeping consolidations throughout the province. Now, in reaction, there was a movement that the city of Toronto itself should gain more power than it currently had. And this was around 2000, 2003, and it was part of, I think, a really general movement, certainly in Canada, but also well beyond. The rise of the consciousness of global city regions, the sense that cities were the engines of economic growth, and that they had to be free to some extent from their shackles of senior governments. So more powers for Toronto were demanded. There were pressures from foundations, quite big foundations, from think tanks, from the financial sector, which is based in Toronto, arguing that not only that city, but other cities needed more power and financial resources. The Conference Board of Canada, a very large representative organization of business, jumped on board. And in Toronto itself, there was a movement to form a large alliance between community groups, the financial sector, other business organizations, voluntary associations like the United Way, to demand a better deal for the city. The response of the provincial government was to pass a new City of Toronto Act, which took Toronto out from under the general strictures of the Municipal Act, gave it further taxation powers. Nothing significant, no income tax, no sales tax, but there were land transfer taxes that could be implemented, hotel taxes, a variety of smaller taxes to try to increase its fiscal resources. But still, there was a persistent shortage of cash, and there is a persistent shortage of cash for transit. Now, over this time, starting about 10 years ago, thinking in the provincial government changed in the way it viewed the prospects of Southern Ontario and what came to be called the Toronto-centered region. There had been talk about the Greater Toronto Area, but the definition of the GTA expanded in the minds of provincial politicians and officials to focus on the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So here is the Greater Toronto Area that shows the Unicity of Toronto in yellow, and it's hemmed in by these other regional governments, which are still two-tiered governments. But the whole region of the Greater Golden Horseshoe stretches well east of Toronto and well west of it, all around the end of Lake Ontario, an area of over 200 kilometers. One whose major problem, and this is a big concern of business, is congestion and the costs of congestion, which are estimated to run into the billions just for the City of Toronto itself every year. The other defining characteristic of the Greater Golden Horseshoe is very rapid development. The darkest areas here show growth rates of 20% in a 5-year period. The next is 10%, and almost every part of the Greater Golden Horseshoe is growing at 10% every 5 years, sorry. So there was a smart growth panel established to start to think about the whole Greater Golden Horseshoe. There was a major provincial policy statement issued that called for densification and intensification of land use. There was an act that started to implement that thinking of the provincial policy statement, and a growth plan for the whole Greater Golden Horseshoe area. So part of this was to set up a green belt so that growth would be concentrated inside of the green belt and also beyond it in growth nodes, including cities like Hamilton and Waterloo and Barrie to the north. And specific growth areas were designated in that plan. This was accompanied by a multiplication of structures within the Ontario government to plan for the region, especially to plan infrastructure. And that's where we stand now. So, conclusions in terms of the brief which was handed to us. What is causing this change? It's undoubtedly the rapid expansion of population. Canada takes in every year about 1% of its population in the form of immigration. This is really quite unique in the world. The state of the economy, both when it's good and when it's poor, has stimulated Ontario government action. And there's always the sense of the need to be competitive in the North American and world contexts. The political process is complicated. There are always defenders of local autonomy, but this local autonomy leads to sometimes very wasteful inter-municipal competition because of the extent to which our municipalities are dependent on the property tax. They need to compete to get new investment. Provincial control is a constant, and there's a sort of ambivalent provincial concern on the one hand about cities becoming a financial drain, but in the case of Toronto, the need to maintain the engine of growth for the provincial economy. So politically, there's never a consensus. And what happens is the provincial government takes decisions, and some people lose, they feel, and other people win, and the province decides what will occur. The institutional design is characterized by a very low level of federal government involvement, as I said, by many special purpose agencies. And insofar as the system as a whole has legitimacy, it's conveyed by provincial elections, which is a fairly thin reed on the legitimacy front. The outcomes, there's still inadequate transportation infrastructure. There are still conflicts about transit. The new scheme has some promise environmentally, but that's yet to be realized. And the inclusiveness is due to provincial spending, which has rapidly increased on education and especially health. So much depends on the provincial government. It's clear that determined, well-organized municipal action can be effective, but the final decision maker is the province. That is what I have to say, so thank you. I welcome any comments and questions.
I think you followed your wife's instructions.
I hope so.
Marco, would you?
I will have to disappoint you because I'm not going to talk comprehensively about Jakarta and its metropolitan region. I will speak only about a particular aspect, which is the role of civil society and communities, especially within the perspective of ecological transition. I think it is useful at this moment because I'm concerned that the talk about metropolitan governance might think that this role of civil society and transition towards ecological age could be discussed later, after we have the structure for the governance. I would like actually to urge that this should be talked about now, before, or when we are designing the metropolitan governance structure. I think that might be useful based on my experience somehow on Jakarta. As you know, Jakarta was flooded on February 16 and 17, and actually until less than 2 weeks ago, I was not sure whether I will come or not because my house was flooded. And only 2 weeks ago, I found that my passport was saved, so I did come here. I would like to begin with this flood story because in the last flood, there are two interesting new features. The one is the long inundation of the coastal area, and secondly, the gushes that overwhelmed central Jakarta, which was not before flooded. The cause for both is infrastructural failure. Pumps in the coastal area failed to work, and a levee collapsed nearby the central area. One can always say that there should be more infrastructure to channel access water, but this statement for me is faulty for seeing only 1/3 of the equation of the flood. You know, it's very simple. F, which is flood, equals the balance between surface runoff and the capacity of natural and man-made drains. It follows very easily that to reduce flood, we need to reduce surface runoff and to increase, of course, the capacity of man-made and natural drains. But the thing is, for more than 100 years, Jakarta and I would suspect that it happens also in many other cities. The works done are mostly on increasing the capacity of man-made and natural drains, which is not sustainable, because when you increase all the time the capacity of the drains without reducing the surface runoff, which is increasing because of human habitation and because of deforestation in the upstream areas, whatever infrastructures you build to drain more water will be always overfilled again and again. And that's what I think has happened in Jakarta for 100 years or more. And some studies confirm this. For example, a book written specifically about the history of flood control in Jakarta. Now, the last flood in Jakarta for me is a wake-up call. So we actually immediately convened a number of civil society organizations and experts and to think about writing up a program which is an alternative to infrastructural approach. This approach that we want to promote, we call conservationist ecological approach, which is basically to reduce surface runoff by reforestation in the upstream areas and by reducing surface runoff in Jakarta itself. You immediately see this has to do with metropolitan scale, because the upstreams area of Jakarta is upstreams outside the jurisdiction of Jakarta. And this leads me to the suggestion that I think when we talk about delineation of metropolitan area, I think it should not be just about economy, it should be also about ecology. I think it is actually fortunate that with the problems of water, our realization about Jakarta and its metropolitan areas is closer to, not to the whole bioregion delineation of the area, but at least to the watershed area. Jakarta, with a population of 9.6 million, with its surrounding districts, it's add up easily to 28 million. And now we are also thinking about adding up a further southern area, which is Bandung and surroundings. Altogether, that would make up more than 34 million population, which would become second largest after Tokyo. Now we are third largest after Seoul and Incheon area. So the idea of bioregion, or at least watershed area, is an important way of delineating a metropolitan region, because water is one whole entity that works in one watershed area. But why I want to emphasize on the role of civil society, because it is obvious that actually a more conservationist ecological approach requires participation by civil society and communities and cross-border cooperation. We need to reforest the upstream areas of Jakarta. We need to cooperate with 2 other provincial governments. And to increase the, to decrease the surface runoff, we need to recharge as much water as possible into the ground. So changing from what we call horizontal drainage to vertical drainage, which is to recharge water into the ground, and at the same time actually to solve the problem of subsidence in Jakarta. Subsidence in Jakarta now has been confirmed in the past 3 years, although the phenomenon has been observed since 70s. Recent studies show that subsidence in Jakarta happens at some point at the rate of 18 centimeters, not millimeters, per year. 18 centimeters per year at some point. The recent study shows at least there are 3 points that have that rate of subsidence. So to recharge water would help this, would stop it. But our temporary calculation shows that we need to have about 4 million recharging wells to do this in the next 20 years. And recharging wells need to be done in every plot. Perhaps one plot or some plots would have more and some would have less. But still, it requires participation of individual citizens, of civil society, of communities. It would be actually cheaper. And I think that's the reason why politicians do not like this approach, because, because it is cheaper, it is decentralized, and it is empowering citizens to own our recovery of the capacity of the earth to help us and free us from flood and other matters. So my other argument about the role of civil society has to do with our recent relative success in asking the governor, the new governor of Jakarta, to reject the 6th elevated toll road proposed by national government. Actually, last week, the governor convened us, a number of civil society leaders, and he told us he has listened to us all in the previous 2 months, and he decided to reject all the 6 segments of the elevated toll road. But he said the private sector negotiated and requested for 2 segments at least. So he asked us whether we have additional arguments to reject these other 2 segments. This is a project worth 42 trillion rupiahs, which is something like 5 billion US dollars. In a way, for us, this is quite, encouraging. We feel a certain degree of success that the new governor, known for his innovativeness and for his humility and for his willingness to listen to people, that he would dare to take such risks under the pressure of the national government to say no to more elevated toll roads. But somehow, I think civil society roles should be more than just rejecting things. Most environmentalists, more conservationists, I think most leftist people have been criticized by philosophers like Slavoj Žižek, who said that, we are good at championing, we are champions at criticizing others, but we are very slow in proposing our alternatives. And that's why now we want really to work on this so-called conservationist approach to water management in Jakarta by really, really working to write a program that could go into budget and could go into a program of mobilizing civil society to do it. But also at this moment, I think there are many other civil society organizations that somehow help people with their initiatives. There are cyclists associations covering the whole region of Jakarta metropolitan area. There are carpooling activities initiated by people. We just also organized a workshop that we call Smart City. Smart City equals smart people and smart process, not smart buildings. That will be exhibited in Berlin in next summer in the ADES Architecture Gallery. In the workshop, interestingly, 2 proposals that we will immediately work on. One proposal is to create a website that would record people converting their yards into open spaces and improve it to be recharging wells. With this kind of website where people can voluntarily report that he converts his yards into green spaces, then there will be a calculator that automatically calculates that because of that Jakarta will have certain percentage more of green spaces, etc. It can also encourage people to help. So I can, for example, report that I want to change my yard into a public space, open spaces, but lack of money, or perhaps I could do it myself, but I need more trees. Can someone, for example, contribute trees? So this is an example where civil society are using the advantage of social media, the IT technology, which actually, decentralize our access to knowledge. By that I mean not only access to information, but also it frees us to co-produce knowledge about ourselves, about our cities, and to define knowledge about our cities ourselves. Besides this emerging social media and IT, I think the civil society in Indonesia, particularly in Jakarta, by the way, is among the largest producer of threat in internet, whether it's Facebook or Twitter. We are also taking advantage of the new law on freedom for public information. So basically we can request any public information from the government, and if within 2 weeks they did not comply, we can sue them, which is very interesting opportunity for us. So, but of course there are problems. As you know, 1998 for us means also a reform, a decentralization, more autonomies for more second tier or third tier regions or municipalities, cities in Indonesia. And it created as much fragmentation as we have heard from many other cities and part of the world. But we think that this also creates an opportunity for us, for civil society, to intervene. And I think we have not done forming or formatting the proper mechanism for the procedures for civil society intervention into public policies. I hope this is a no-return avenue for us. The new technology, the decentralization, new ways of civil society to organize itself to intervene into public policy debate. I'm sure things must be done at very structural level, at governance structure, etc. But I think, as someone mentioned this morning, that it is about change in mindset, and I think it should start from also communities and civil societies. We actually last year has this bigger ambition to set up a citizens metropolitan citizens association, which I think is failing. It's too big for us, for a civil society organization. But then this flood problem, I think, gives us an opportunity to start an association which focuses on water management, and we are starting to do that. So there are opportunities and challenges faced in Jakarta with the new decentralization and other developments in the past 10 years. I'm sure in many other cities there are also civil society associations. In Jakarta, I have mentioned carpooling society, river society, water society, pedestrian society, cyclist society, and even also train commuters association, and of course business associations. I think if we can find a way to mobilize this association, free association of civil societies, and to relate that to a bigger structure of metropolitan governance, I think that would be perfect. And I think we need to think about that when we are designing the structure, not after we design the structure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing in a whole new spectrum of thinking in this discussion. What I'd like to do is to ask all of you to give any comments or ways by which these two presentations have triggered thoughts for you, and then open up for 1 or 2 questions. Would you like? Yeah. I think it's on. Yeah.
Two presentations, there are many takeaway points, and I'll just pick three which I can connect with the cities in India, and particularly the city I come from, which is Chennai. In Robert's presentation in Toronto, it's a very interesting thing that he mentioned, that the suburbs wanted amalgamation so that it could use the city's wealth in order to invest in the suburb, which I think is an interesting and a healthy relationship. Because what I see happening here is the reverse, that the city needs the suburbs for its rich resources, particularly the land. And hence, a certain kind of a parasitical relationship develops between the core city and the suburb. In fact, there's a deep suspicion in the megacity project that the core city wants the land and resources, and hence this huge megacity project. So in that sense, it's an healthy thing to look at, that how you use the city in order to kind of develop the region in a more equitable way. But I don't know really what happened in Toronto, whether it really realized that, or it ended up in being a parasitical kind of a contract. The second thing that you mentioned in Toronto, which I connect with Marco's presentation, is the thing, when you mentioned of horseshoe, the other horseshoe that came to my mind was the Randstad model of the Netherlands, which is an interesting regional approach, where it's a three-center, it's a kind of a polycentric model arranged in an horseshoe. So there is an alternative to a megacity, which doesn't have to be centered around one city, but basically you're looking at a polycentric model, in which case no city has to, within the megacity, doesn't have to lose its own identity. It could flourish, and it could mutually support. But that connects with what Marco said. Is there another way to delineate a region, which is, let's say, using ecology? Okay, so another parallel thought that entered my mind was the Richard Foreman's idea of region, where we use corridors and patches, and suddenly look at cities wherein we have a very complex geometry that comes out, not this contiguous, mega, humongous, city centered on one point. But once you deploy ecology and other ways of looking at region, then there is a complex form, a complex geometry which compels us to think, not privileging only one center. So be it Hyderabad, or be it Chennai, or be it Bangalore, it looks this 8,000 or 7,000 square kilometers was mobilized to see how well to serve one single city. So one could approach it not only from this kind of a contractual parasitical criticism, but also from ecology and the different kinds of geometries that it could throw.
Anybody else?
Maybe I would like to put in a few points. First of all, I would like to congratulate CII, CPR, and all the other partner organizations who have taken up this very, very important subject for today, because our cities and basically all over the world, urbanization is happening so fast that every presentation that I see, be it London or Jakarta or Toronto, we can feel that they are all evolving a system where probably they can administer better and bring the best for their citizens. It's the same scenario in India. Being a corporator for 15 years at the Pune Municipal Corporation, I myself have realized that every city, Pune, has been growing so fast that we have not been able to, the administration has not been able to cope up with the kind of growth. And these kind of platforms, these kind of interactions give us lessons to learn as to what several data that urbanization is happening so fast. 50% of the population world over stays now in cities. In India, almost 40%. And the largest percentage of urbanization is in India. So when this kind of urbanization is happening, it would really be the right time to introspect and to find out what are the patterns which are being adopted as best practices all over the world. Marco has thrown a light on a very important aspect, that is ecology. We are sitting in a premise which is very vulnerable to climate change. I remember 2 years back, the cover page of India Today showing the Gateway of India, the foot of Gateway of India underwater, and is this going to be the picture by 2000? That was the caption. Climate change, India is very vulnerable to climate change, and therefore these are new aspects which city governance has to look into. If there is no rain, what do? Do we tap the underground water? What are the kind of systems which we need to put in place to make sure that our groundwater doesn't get depleted, and not only doesn't get depleted, but make sure that we have a recharge of this water? Rainwater harvesting. If there is more rains, then how exactly are we going to cater to this? Because then Marcos just said he fortunately found his passport and therefore could come here. Now this is a scenario in several other cities in our country also, and more so in the countries where there were no rains. So this is another aspect I feel which needs to be looked into, and probably this would be the right forum to actually address these problems and give cities of India guidelines as to what are the best practices. In London, things have been done. If it has been done, then how, and how exactly the people got together to make these changes happen. There have been several systems which we are working in, especially in Maharashtra. We have a typical law where the administration, the commissioner, is given more power than the mayors. As somebody rightly said, the mayor only goes to cut the red ribbons, but not really. If a mayor decides he wants to or she wants to be proactive, I think he or she can make a world of a difference. I mean, I have experienced it myself, so I know it can happen, but of course you don't have powers, and therefore you are limited in that sense. There was an experiment made in India, especially in Maharashtra, with 2 municipal corporations where we had the mayor and council. And I think that ran only for 1 year. Now, why did it fail? I think that was the ideal system to work in, because at the moment, in municipal corporations, we are only firefighting. Whatever problem, you fight it, and there's no time for planning. We see a city engineer of a municipal corporation, he looks into the daily course of passing building permissions. He also does the development plan, and he's also expected to bring in innovative ideas to develop the city. Now, how can one man look at all these 3 things? So I think we need an entire revamp of a governing system at the local self-government. And the local self-government undoubtedly is the most important part of governance because it rules the grassroots. And if we really don't make visible changes in that, our cities are not going to really be, yeah. So I really look forward that this platform thinks and deliberates and brings out these solutions, and thinking where we have to revamp the whole system, probably where we could get in better governance. Thank you.
Shall we open it to the public and want to say something? Yeah.
I just wanted to, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. In the first place, I don't know whom we are talking to, so I think we are probably talking to those who are converted, who believe that, that governance need to improve and we need to do something drastically different. I know that that there are a lot of luminaries out here who've, in their lifetime, have tried to improve governance in the cities. Mr. Sriram Krishnan is here, and we've been listening to him for a long time about what needs to be done to improve the conditions in the cities. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened. And you know why, because today, if you see those whom we are supposed to address this are also not here, so you know why it's not happening. It's generally said that we neglect cities to our peril, and it is a fact that cities are the drivers of economic growth, cities are drivers of innovation, cities are drivers of well-being, culture, everything actually happens in the cities. Unfortunately, we have neglected cities for a long time. And something drastically needs to be done. I entirely agree with Mrs. Chavan when she says there's an urgent need to revamp the entire system of governance that we currently have. The way I see it is, I think there are 2 aspects. One is how the cities are governed, typically say like a municipal corporation or a city of Pune, and how the region, which is beyond that city, how those regions are governed. And we need to basically have two things in place. One is that we need to have a mechanism by which the voice of the citizen is heard, and they have a stake in the future of the city. And two is that that system of governance should be able to deliver the services to those people which it attempts to serve. On both these accounts, to my mind, I think the system that we have currently, not only in Maharashtra but in India, generally fails very miserably. Now, if at all we are saying that if the citizen's voice is to be heard, the citizen's voice in the cities is actually heard through the municipalities. However, the decisions are not taken in the municipalities, as Mr. Chavan also mentioned, that the decisions are not taken in the municipalities. There, either the state governments, in the case of Maharashtra, to which I have a fairly intimate knowledge, I know that the important decisions are not taken even by the municipal commissioner, let's say. Forget about even the mayor, but the mayor in the equation really doesn't have as many powers as even the municipal commissioner having. So the state government essentially takes those decisions, and the state government is not accountable to the citizens of that city. So there's a huge structural problem that you see. Those who are accountable for it are not really empowered to do what they're supposed to do. And one of the key things, I think, which we have been driving, and I think various forums, including Bombay First, have been driving, is that we need to have something like not even a mayor and council system, something like a directly elected mayor who has ultimately to show to the people what he or she has been able to do for the improvement in the city. The structure that we currently have doesn't provide the kind of accountability to the people, to the citizens, as it stands today. That's an important point, and I don't know how these structural issues are addressed. I couldn't hear that in both the cities of Ontario and Jakarta. So how is the accountability established in this governance framework? Two, very often it is generally believed that the moment you give authority, automatically the services also should follow, and the services should also fall within the ambit of the municipalities. And I feel that, again, there's sometimes we tend to make a mistake. I personally feel that the municipal structures, the municipal councillors or the municipal general body, essentially is more like a regulatory structure. They set up a vision for the city, and they'll expect that vision to be translated into action. Their entire job is to get the resources and see that the vision actually gets translated into reality. But very often, as Mr. Chavan also just now said, that the same junior engineer is doing the development plan, the same junior engineer is supposed to address complaints, also execute projects on the ground. What all is he supposed to do? Personally, I feel he's not supposed to do everything. The job of the municipality is that of a regulation. It's supposed to ensure that those agencies which are supposed to deliver those services deliver it to the specifications that were given, and ensure nothing less than that. Unfortunately, what happens is the execution and the regulation had got fused into the same body. The body which is supposed to see the quality of roads that's supposed to be delivered in your cities, is the quality itself is something that it's supposed to regulate and supposed to execute. So you have two authorities fused into one. That's the reason why you're having extremely poor quality infrastructure, extremely poor quality of execution of, say, water supply schemes. Because those who are supposed to keep a watch are actually, they have a much larger stake in ensuring that there are certain leakages happen in the delivery mechanism. And I'm quite sure Mr. Chavan also must have seen this happening, that whenever you actually try to see that you try to control the expenditure, you try to control, say, the unauthorized water connections, the same people will come back, the corporators probably will come back and say that, no, just allow that, regularize those connections. If you catch hold of a junior engineer who has been corrupt, some of the corporators will come back and say that, please let them go. They're actually helping us in our political system. So you have a situation wherein there's a nexus between completely two opposing kind of objectives. And unless we are able to separate that out, I think we'll not be able to ensure good governance to the people. So I feel that the two critical things, there has to be direct accountability to the citizens through, to my mind, a directly elected mayor who's chosen by the people. And two, that we need to have a separation of the municipal services, could be water supply, could be sewage systems, could be roads, from the regulatory services, where the municipal councillors actually are dissociated from the execution part of it. Their job should be to see that all those who are delivering those services are held accountable for the quality and the standards that they've set for themselves. I think these are two fundamental things, and I don't think, unless we are able to achieve it, we should be in a position to deliver a good quality infrastructure for the cities.
Thank you. I'm now in a bit of a dilemma because we have two more presentations, and there's a desperate need for also making sure that we also have questions from the audience. So if I could ask 2 or 3 people who want to ask questions which are related to clarifications of the 2 presentations, I will invite them. Please be short and succinct. I see 2 hands there. Can you quickly give them the mics, please? And please introduce yourselves. And then I'll ask both of you to make some comments and then invite the next speakers.
Thanks, Sheela. I have a question. My name is Darshini Mahadevia. I teach in a planning school. I have a question for Professor Young. In Canada, you talked about this amalgamation of municipalities around the metro cities. And I understand that process was through referendums at the smaller municipality levels. But I also have heard, at least in case of Montreal, that then there was demerger process as well. And it has created a very complicated governance system. So if you could throw further light onto what has happened in Toronto metropolitan region.
Carol?
This is more by way of concurrence with what Marco said, because
Can you introduce
you are in
yourself, please?
Sorry?
Can you introduce yourself?
Sorry. I'm Daryl De Monte, a journalist. I'm more in concurrence with what Marco said, because you're in very good company here in a city which in July 26th, 2005, got about 94 centimeters of rain in about 12 hours, and the city came to a halt. I was on a Concerned Citizens Commission, which published a report which showed that the railway, which is the lifeline of Mumbai, the water in what we thought was a creek, what we thought was a drain, actually a river, the water was just a foot below the railway tracks. Had the water risen another foot, South and North Mumbai would have been severed. But maybe Mrs. Chavan from her party we should be asking her party, which is in charge of the Maharashtra State Road Development Corporation, why it and the Congress party are concerned only in building roads, sea links, road schemes for 8% of the commuting public which travels by car. And we are spending roughly what Jakarta is spending, 20 or 30,000 crores is 4 or 5 billion US on road schemes in a city which used to have the highest percentage of the population commuting using public transport, 87%. It's now reducing because of the crush of cars. And I'm afraid that the political class, and especially the coalition in this state, both the Congress and the NCP, have an edifice complex and a road complex and a motor car complex, all of which they should shed immediately.
Some quick responses from both of you.
Actually, I would like to respond to the previous comment about the possibility of imagining metropolitan region as not only focused or centers around one city with very high urban primacy. I think that's why we have been talking about another term to make it complicated. I would like to suggest the term multipolitan, because mega city, megapolitan tends to say that there is one big city dominating others, but multipolitanism is about many cities in one region which can be defined either according to ecological consideration or others. On the water problem, so I don't know things and situation about Mumbai, but and also on road situation here. But in Jakarta, we have established some facts that actually the more you build roads, especially toll roads, the more you induce traffic and the more you create traffic jams. Actually, we just have a new case. A new elevated non-toll road highway in Jakarta opened last week, and immediately it was flooded by cars. And the thing is, it encourages suburbanization, given the context of Indonesia where fuel is heavily subsidized. There is argument about road ratio, and this is an argument often raised by many engineers. Jakarta has very low road ratio as compared to Tokyo, etc. But again, the 20% road ratio in Tokyo does not make Tokyo free from traffic jam. What makes Tokyo has traffic jam, especially when you talk about elevated highways, etc., inside the city, but it has much more public transport. But for Jakarta's specific situation, the cause of traffic jam is actually the wrong or unsustainable land use pattern where, you see, Jakarta proper, its population growth is at the rate of about 1%, which is lower than the national average. But the surrounding suburbs are growing at the rate of 4 to 5%, which is of course much lower than what you have here in Mumbai and Hyderabad and other metropolitan regions. But still, this is to explain the cause of the traffic jam, which is the induced traffic or trips by car. So I think you might have different situations here that I think we should talk about it at length later during dinner. Thank you.
Well, thank you both to the floor and the panel for these remarks. I will be brief if I can. First, I'm not going to talk about Montreal. Montreal is a complete mess, and I said that I would be succinct. On the question of the justice of having the suburbs developing at the expense of the central city, one could go along with this, except that, of course, development didn't stop. And development spread well beyond Metro Toronto. And in some ways, the citizens of Toronto were paying for that. But the original suburbs then became relatively poor because people with money moved farther out. And so those original suburbs, which developed on the back of the city of Toronto, especially Etobicoke and Scarborough, are now distressed places. Second, on the issue of how big a city can be, well, I suppose a city can be almost infinite, but despite being a land-rich country, Canada and Ontario in particular cannot afford to continue to sprawl at the rate we are sprawling. North Americans have a penchant for single-family detached houses on plots of land, the bigger the better, and we're just devouring farmland, really high-quality farmland at too high a rate, and that's why the province has stepped in with its smart, compact growth strategy, which hasn't really bitten yet, but we'll see whether it will. And finally, Mr. Ubale's comment about accountability and what is needed. I completely agree that accountability and an elected mayor with some powers are very, very important. But the problem of cities is that they do not define their own boundaries. And growth keeps spilling beyond the boundaries, beyond the boundaries, beyond the boundaries. And no matter how powerful a mayor and no matter how directly elected the mayor is, that kind of growth cannot be controlled by the city administration. And so there's a need for senior levels of government, which are not as directly accountable, to play a role there. It's the same thing in the United Kingdom. London is huge, but the entire southeast England can only be planned for now, short of incredible and very costly intermunicipal cooperative agreements. It can only be planned for now by the central government of the United Kingdom. And the same is true in the case of Ontario. It's the provincial government that can and must try to integrate the interests of the City of Toronto with the burgeoning sprawl around it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I invite you to sit in the audience? And yes, while they, but 2 sentences, because I'm really...
First of all, because Mr. DeMonte referred to my name, that is why. First of all, I think this forum is much above political bickerings, number one. Secondly, I have not come here as a mouthpiece of my party to say why my party has taken a particular stand, which I don't know of. And if you can take some time off and search on Google as to what I have done in the past in my city as far as environment conservation is concerned, I'm a bit of a rebel in the political circles.
Thank you.
So.
So, Mike, will you start?
Yeah. Okay. Can someone help me get this?
I'll ask Mike to start. And do you have a presentation?
Okay. Yes, I do. First of all, it's very nice to be back in Mumbai after many years, and I'm totally charmed by the graciousness that you've been hosting us, and also the level of the exchange is very, very rewarding. So I'm going to talk about Seoul for a little while. We talk about other experiences in a way that is not a model, of course, but more as thought-provoking and even cautionary. And I think we can find both in the case of Korea. This photo, air photo, basically shows you the metropolitan regions of Korea, South Korea. We can start with a national land population. The purpose of this basically is to tell you that it's a very mountainous country, and so there's actually not a lot of land where cities could develop. Furthermore, even in the 1970s, if you look at the darker spots, you see that the population was widely distributed. It's only over the last 30 or 40 years when the concentration of population in Seoul has really taken off. And you can see this, that it's been unrelenting. If regional planning or city region planning is the question, Seoul or South Korea has tried everything. It is the classic textbook of every single policy you could ever imagine has been tried in Korea, and they've even invented new ones. And yet, none of them stopped the growth of Seoul. To the point at where today, Seoul equals half of the population of South Korea, the greater Seoul capital city region. In addition, unlike many other Asian countries, but soon to come to your country too, I would imagine, pervasive depopulation of rural areas. Korea is now at a point of depopulation itself. Japan has already started that, and Korea is close behind. So that by the year 2005, you only had about 3 or 4 city regions that were actually growing. The rest of the country is depopulating. Democratization, if we talk about the governance of the region or the country, democratization comes late and hard fought. And what might surprise you is these photos of people in different modes of protest are actually very recent. This is after democracy, not fighting for it. So this very strong state in contest with citizens over all kinds of things continues on today, but it is a full democracy that comes into play only from the 1980s, late 1980s. Devolution is even later. During the 60s and 70s up to the mid-80s, you had martial law and local autonomy abolished. So it's only 1995 that mayors are actually elected for the first time in modern history. And it's only 1990s onward that citizens have the right to petition government. And only 1998 and after when fiscal decentralization actually begins. So it's very much like Indonesia, actually, in terms of timing, that decentralization is really only about 10 years old. So we don't have a lot of experience. But one of the problems is that if you have half of the population of a country in one single city region, that region is going to have a lot of advantage even in a process of decentralization. So this chart shows you that the level of we can say autonomy, in other words, self-financing. What it's showing you is Seoul and Gyeonggi, its surrounding province, are fairly self-sufficient in funding, but the other cities and regions are not, and they're still very dependent on central government financing. So even if you have massive decentralization in the case of South Korea, it still favors Seoul. And Seoul also, as a capital city, gets all kinds of expenditures that never are registered in terms of local budgets. So the per capita expenditures on a city like Seoul are immensely greater than those expenditures on any other city in the country. In addition, 98% of all of the corporations are headquartered in Seoul, and they're powerful. Samsung is just one name that I'm sure you all recognize, that are larger, have corporate profits larger than many countries. So together, Seoul becomes a very, very powerful vortex of the Korean economy and politics as well. The 1998 crisis, which Koreans don't call the finance crisis, they call it the IMF crisis. And then they play with IMF. F means I am fired. There's another word that starts with F that they use too that I dare not say. But they blame the IMF for the whole show. And there's some truth to that. At any rate, this dramatically changes Korea from a society that more or less had even distribution of income to the beginning or a next era of what I call neo-developmentalism, which is a combination of a very strong state with neoliberal policies. So the state is operating hand in hand with these very large corporations to, in some ways, dismantle the state, or, as some people were saying this morning, privatize much of what's going on, or corporatize, but still stay strongly involved. Okay, so let's talk about Seoul directly for a minute. All of this is very, very compressed in time. If you looked at this one photo of 1900, Seoul says, the people in Korea say that, that Seoul has a 2,000-year-old history, and yet it was very small until the middle of the 20th century. Around the turn of the century, 1900, it was basically a city of palaces and hamlets. By 2010, when the housing juggernaut was put in place, it became what people have called apartment city, in which the vernacular city was more or less eliminated by corporate production of housing, which, functionally speaking, housed everyone. But in terms of, we talk about placemaking and other things, we could ask other questions. But to look at these graphs, you'll see that around let's see if I can see the graph. Yeah, around 1990 or so, Seoul City starts to taper off and now starts to decline in population, whereas the metropolitan region starts to continues to grow. So you have the classic case of the core in terms of nighttime population. The core starts to decrease and the suburban areas start to not only increase in residential population, but also in some of the high-tech and other kinds of industries as well. So we have a situation in which you have a very powerful central government, and you also have a very powerful Seoul government. But you have no mechanism to coordinate among the local governments. So in Seoul itself, you have a mayor who's elected for 4 years. And also in a parallel with Indonesia, the new mayor is actually from an NGO and very progressive guy. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen in Seoul. But until 2 years ago, it was a mayor who was part of the neoliberal party of Lee Myung-bak, who was instituting a number of policies that I'll try to talk about. It also has a city council that is elected and can be from a different party than the mayor. So there's often that oppositional element, which could be good. It has 25 wards with populations ranging from 140,000 to 700,000. Now, the whole population of Korea itself is around 40 some odd million, which is probably less than some states in India. So it's a very compact nation in that regard. You can see from this nightlight picture, though, the kind of bluish area in the middle, that's Seoul city, and the rest its surrounding region. So you can see how it's expanded way beyond the boundaries. In terms of finance, this 2002 is when it really starts to devolve or decentralize financing, but still it remains highly centralized. Estimates are about 35% of budgets are locally produced, and the rest come from central governments. There are many other mechanisms that the central government can use to try to push local budgets to spend on things that the national government wants. So, in other words, local autonomy is very, very modest in Korea. And you have a mix of decentralization or devolution, but also deconcentration, simply putting offices in another location, but keeping control under national government. So if we look at the question of how is the national capital region, the larger region, which is composed of Seoul, Gyeonggi-do, and Incheon, how is that managed? Well, in a very, very short statement, it's not managed at all. There are a number of coordination bodies and councils that have been established, but none of them have really been put in force, and they have no legal powers. So there is actually no coordination over this region as such. Therefore, the main players in terms of managing the growth of the capital city region are really the national government and individual city or provincial governments. Seoul itself has the status of a province. So here's what some of the many policies that the Korean government tried over the years that will sound familiar to you. One was the institution of a green belt. Korea has the classic development state. In fact, it is the one that's often talked about as the model. And by that I mean, when the state says it's going to do something, it does it. In the case of Korea's green belt, it was absolutely enforced. Nothing new was added to that green belt during its life. The net result was, though, that the commuting population had to go out further. So it kind of leaped over the green belt and extended the metropolitan region even further. Another policy that the government put was, direct control of a population. 1960s and 70s, there was the government actually burned down slums. They stopped the growth of universities because of this very strong cultural power of Seoul that you can learn more by sleeping in Seoul than by studying in the countryside. That kind of feeling. You have to be in Seoul. Seoul is the only place you can go upward in society. So the government tried to actually stop population through education policies. Then it had a number of zones, no industrial location, no this or that, and then selective growth and so on. The net result of that turns out in the 1990s that Seoul city is faced with growing suburbs, but it can't grow itself because it's had all of these provisions to stop itself from growing. And this is part of the politics that we'll see in a minute. At any rate, from the 1980s onward, neoliberalism starts to come in, and you find a dismantling of the green belts, and the new policy is to create new towns to redistribute the population. This is done through a national land agency and a national housing agency that basically assembles, clears the land, and then large development corporations come in and build housing. More recently, as a plan to remove the capital city functions from Seoul to somewhere near Daejeon, which is only about an hour and a half from Seoul itself. On the plus side, has a magnificent, actually quite extensive and quite well working transportation system in terms of both rail and bus. It's adopted the Kurichiba bus system with articulated buses, dedicated lanes, and buses of different colors depending on where it's going, how far it's going. It works quite well. However, not enough to displace the automobile, which is one of the biggest problems in Seoul, is the massive traffic congestion. Okay. So the mayor of Seoul is faced with the problem that the kind of deteriorating economy within Seoul that's being extroverted through all these policies. So it engages on something called the second miracle on the Han, which included a proposal for a 152-story building, all kinds of mega projects. The one by Hadid in the middle there, on this side, is actually being built as a design park. All of this for world city branding, for intercity competition, and the whole neoliberal kind of spiel about competitiveness. These are all stopped by the new mayor, so we'll see what happens. But in the process, as I said, the vernacular city more or less disappears, and you have mega projects covering very large swaths of the city as a way to regenerate its growth, but not hand in hand with any surrounding provinces. Incheon, as some of you may know, is busy doing Songdo, a $30 billion landfill project off the coast. So to conclude, there are a number of issues that are not common to the rest of Asia, but they are, in fact, very important in Korea now. One is, after 1998, there was a disengagement or a breaking of the contract of workers, lifetime working, and now about half of the workforce of Seoul is temporary and of very low income, or I should say insecure income. So you have a problem of housing supply, housing gluts now, because the housing industry is producing endless housing, but not at the price affordable to lower income people. So you have housing gluts, but also housing needs. The government has intervened with social housing, which is very innovative and interesting itself. But you also have a demographic turn, which means that the labor force is shrinking in an aging society. Along with that, you have a rise of foreign population, particularly foreign workers who will never be citizens, growing now over 1 million people now in Seoul and other cities. The biggest fear that I hear when I'm in Korea is the rise of China, absorbing industry from particularly provincial towns in Korea itself, and how can Seoul reinvent itself, because China is doing everything. And as I said, traffic and congestion. Air pollution is also unique in the sense that it's not necessarily coming from Korea, but it's also blowing over from China, from the sandstorms that go through Beijing and over. This photo over here is actually of Seoul itself. Rising inequalities and a multiculturalism. And finally, reunification. Seoul is only 41 kilometers from the border with North Korea. And that equation is never far from anyone's mind. There are many, many refugees coming down from North Korea one way or another. And they end up often on street corners trying to get day jobs because there's a difficulty in the social integration of those people. So some cities may wish they had these problems because the problems that the cities have are much greater than these. There's not a water problem, there's not a problem with drainage or any of that kind of thing. It's a problem of a quite different order that, as I said here, deals more with social inequalities and what other people have talked about is sense of place. So, according to the OECD, Korea, by the way, is the only Asian country that is a member of OECD, except for Japan, too. And so the OECD talked about metropolitan governments, had these 3 recommendations. More incentive from central government for horizontal coordination. In other words, how to make Seoul, Gyeonggi-do, and Incheon somehow have some kind of cooperation. That's really missing. Activating the lowest level of government, the wards. This is much like Marco was talking about, how to get citizens involved in the planning process is very weak still in Korea, even with democracy. And the suggestion was to create some kind of metropolitan regional council, these council of governments that are in San Diego or Los Angeles and other places. Those are the recommendations being put forward. And so in lieu of those recommendations, to conclude, what is really managing the growth of Seoul is Seoul City itself or the respective local governments and a very strong national government with very strong corporations hand in hand doing a lot of massive land development. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah, yes. Right, I've been asked to make some observations on Tokyo. I don't have a presentation, and my knowledge of Tokyo is not as great as it is of London. So what I'm going to do is make these observations as an outsider, as somebody from outside, looking at what's been happening in Tokyo and the debates they've been having over the last 20 years. What have I found of interest? I'm not sure they're going to be so startlingly interesting to keep you all awake at this stage of the day, but I'll do my best. Tokyo, the levels of government in Japan, in the Tokyo region, are twofold. There's the prefecture level, of which Tokyo metropolitan government is deemed to be a prefecture. And then below that, there are the municipalities carrying out the lower level services. And that's been a structure that's been there for a long time. In the Tokyo region, the prefecture, the Tokyo metropolitan government, the central core arm of the TMG, as it's called, contains 8 million people, extending a bit more because they've taken this strange western extension up to 13 million. But the Tokyo metropolitan region is more like 35 million. And so it's a huge area beyond the TMG, beyond the metropolitan government of population. And it's only central government that has an involvement in the planning and organization of that broader region. And that brings me on to another point about talking about Japan, and that is the strength of central government. The developmental state that was developed in the post-war period to promote economic growth is still there and is still a very strong element in the whole hierarchical structures of government in the country. But what is interesting in terms of the debates of the last 20 years has been the way in which that developmental state has been challenged and is under a lot of discussion about how it's going to adapt to certain pressures of more recent times. Some of those two significant issues has been how to deal with financial austerity. A second one has been what to do about this lack of government at the regional level. And the discussions about these and the actions taken in regard to these have led to increasing tensions, increasing power debates between city level and national level. So that's been a feature of what's been happening in the last 20 years. Oh, the other thing I meant to say at the outset was one of the differences about the Tokyo situation is this one about lack of growth. And now a lot of the debates there are in terms of what to do about the decline in population. The projections for Tokyo over the forthcoming decades is one of decline, and how do you deal with an aging society in that context? Now, two of the trends that have been challenging that developmental state, which I'll talk about in turn, one has been decentralization, and the other has been globalization. In terms of decentralization, this is particularly revolved around the issue of financial control and the way in which this financial control of the developmental state is being reduced. And this arose in the context of the financial crisis of the country in the 1990s, the lost decade, and that led to a whole sort of revision of national government approaches with the familiar patterns of privatization and streamlining the bureaucracy. And the old political system was seen to be part of the problem. This led to an act in 2000 called the Omnibus Decentralization Act, based on the idea of subsidiarity and trying to create stronger municipal governments by decentralizing some of the powers. And this decentralization of power also led to mergers between municipalities to actually take on these new responsibilities. However, these new responsibilities came with less ability to do anything, because with the new responsibilities also came less money from central government. So they were in the situation of having increased powers but reduced finance. However, this is a national policy. This particular situation didn't affect Tokyo like other areas, because Tokyo had, because of its economic situation and power, had actually been less reliant on finance from central government anyway, and so this change had less impact on Tokyo itself, which had also led to certain political grumblings from the rest of the country about Tokyo benefiting more than they were from these changes. The second trend then I want to mention is the globalization and this competition between cities, which we heard about in Seoul and in London. This also has had an impact in Tokyo too. Tokyo rose to the situation of being one of the top 3 world cities in all the literature in the 1980s. but after that, the financial crisis and the 1990s meant that it lost a lot of its glory and its position, and is feeling more and more threatened by other Asian cities, Singapore, Hong Kong, Seoul maybe. And so there was a lot of concern that the city was actually losing in this competition. And this fed into the debate about regional government, because it was felt that the city region was the economic powerhouse on which to build any competitive situation for Tokyo, and yet the regional level was weak. So the debate has arisen in the last 10 years about trying to do something more about regional government, for the government of the area like the capital region of Tokyo. And this has arisen because of, firstly, because of, as I say, seeing that the city region is a better basis for competing in this process of competition, and then, but also because decentralization, going down to the municipal level, had weakened the prefecture level. So the prefecture level, the upper level, had less responsibilities and became a weaker body, which also, therefore, was weakening that broader regional kind of approach, and it was accepted that certain issues like environment and transport needed some kind of regional organization. So as a result of all this, the national level introduced an act, National Land Sustainability Act of 2005, with the idea of preparing wide area regional plans. And one of these was prepared for the Tokyo capital region in 2009. However, it is a rather vague and general document built upon consensus and trying to get everybody to agree, and as most consensus documents, it doesn't say anything big and bold. And of course, the other issue is the same one as I mentioned in relation to London, is that any regional body for that 35 million region in Tokyo is going to be a very dominant player in the national arena, and that in itself is a political problem for other areas. So again, that is another big problem in trying to create any new regional based approach to the governance of the Tokyo area. So that's to the national level, that debate is going on. But then there's also developments and issues coming up from the city level. And there's been increasing challenges from the governor of Tokyo, that is the equivalent of the elected mayor, challenging the national government. As I say, a national government, traditionally, there's a hierarchical system of national policies coming down from a national government. For example, the regional airport strategies come down as part of the national plan. And the Ishihara, the governor of Tokyo, has, for the first time really, started developing independent and autonomous ideas to put against the national picture. And in 2001, he produced the capital region megalopolis concept, which was the first time that the governor of Tokyo had produced a plan beyond the boundaries of his responsibility. So he was making a play for producing regionally oriented plan, and this was all part of a power game between the Tokyo city and central government. It did actually originate from the idea that the national government had of moving the capital out of Tokyo and putting it somewhere else. And this is part of his strategy to say, well, if we plan this thing properly at a regional level, there's no need to move the capital out, because the idea was to move it out and to ease congestion and make it more possible to manage the city. And the idea of having a regional plan was to demonstrate that wasn't necessary. You didn't need to move the capital out of Tokyo. And so this regional plan had various ring roads in it, and an alternative airport strategy, upgrading one of the airports nearer to Tokyo. And as I said, that these ideas were part of a power game versus national government. So you had this, as I say, top-down move towards more regional approach, but also the bottom-up city level moving up. Another example of the way in which the city is exerting its authority a bit more is by the way it was using the bid for the Olympic Games. This seems to be something everybody uses, these Commonwealth Games and these Olympic Games, but it's not all about sport, it's all about governmental power. And one of the ideas is that by bidding for the 2016 Olympic Games, the governor of Tokyo could get a whole lot of his pet projects and the development of certain parts of the city integrated into the Olympic bid. That would therefore force national government to pursue his agenda and also get money out of national government to do that. So this is another way of the governor using his position to pit against the national level. They failed to get the 2016 Games, but they haven't given up. They're now bidding for the next one. And apparently one of the reasons they didn't get the first round was that nobody in Tokyo, well, no, less than 50% of people in Tokyo wanted any Olympic Games. However, one of the contributions that London has made to Tokyo and to help the governor of Tokyo is that the London Games were so successful and popular. Now there are 70% of people in Tokyo now want the Games, and so it's shifted the whole popularity and emphasis of the bid. So finally then, I just want to just sum up what I think some of the major trends are happening there. The decentralization has given opportunities for more power, though, as I say, less resources to the local level. Globalization is tending to upgrade the power and importance of cities, so that both those forces are increasing the power of the metropolitan level. But national government is still a player in this situation. And one thought I had about the national government in Japan is that, which links to some of the environmental and climate change things we heard about a minute ago from Marco. And that is that these big issues like climate change and in Tokyo, of course, Japan, the earthquake, these are big issues that require some kind of strong national state involvement. Well, you could say they require them. I mean, but maybe some people could say they can be dealt with in other ways. But I think risk management of these issues does require that. If you compare what happened in Japan to what happened Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans on a market-oriented, decentralized kind of approach, there's vast differences in the way that was dealt with. So I think in some ways these sort of climate ecological risk kind of aspects are going to maintain a certain level of national centralized state involvement. So what I think you've got is a reduction in the top-down bureaucratic developmental state, but not its total decline. It's still a player, and you have an increasing degree of power and influence from the city level. And what the result of all is that you have less of a bureaucratic approach and more of a political approach. More debate, more interplay between the levels, interplay between the strong political players like the governor and other actors in the region and so on. I mean, finally, I just say in the Japanese case, there's a lot of discussion about the low level of public participation and civic society in this situation. And although there is concern about that, I think there's still a long way to go in developing that aspect in the Japanese situation. So that's all I have. Those are my observations.
Now I'd like to invite you. You want to say something, Mr. Pathak?
Most of the international experiences we have heard are of metropolitan cities which are also national capitals. The 5 Indian cities that have been chosen for the study are not national capitals. And whether it makes a difference in managing a metropolitan city which is a national capital versus a city which is not a national capital. One could imagine that access to resources could be quite different, whether you are a national capital or whether you are a state capital. And in the Indian situation, it is also added by the political complexity. If you have 3 levels, the national government, the state government, and the local government. The 3 can be from 3 different political parties. And the state government has used metropolitan government to try and tell the citizens that we are doing better than the municipality, which is with the opposition party. And these kind of complexities do have a role, apart from multiplicity of agencies which has been emphasized all along. The other thing, particularly in the civil society role which was emphasized in case of Jakarta, I think the problem is how does one create a forum for different kinds of civil societies to come together? Because civil societies also have a lot of fights among themselves, and they need a forum to sort those out. Otherwise, the debate continues. And there are many examples which one has seen in case of Mumbai. In international examples, I didn't hear much about the way the finances were raised for the metropolitan governance, perhaps because they are national capital cities. Mumbai has many innovations on that, and one of that is FSI. So FSI is seen as controlling densities and managing cities' infrastructure demands or managing carrying capacities. In Mumbai, it has been turned into a very good fiscal instrument. Through FSI, Mumbai has promised free houses to 80% of its population. Through FSI, it wants to conserve its heritage. Through FSI, it wants to build its roads and metros. And through FSI, it also contributes to state exchequer. So that's a great innovation. Perhaps other cities would also like to consider. The question really is that whether we want a metropolitan governance that attempts to do everything, or whether we want to define its functions. I think what is important in case of London is that 4 functions are very clearly defined. If you read the acts of most metropolitan development authorities, they can almost do everything under the sun.
And that is why they end up in many kinds of problems. So perhaps what is necessary is that what the local government cannot do, only that the metropolitan government should try to do, or metropolitan authorities should try to do. And once that domain is clearly defined, then we might be able to get more effective metropolitan governance. Thank you. These are the few comments I had.
A couple of things, Mike, which you said would probably sober the minister's enthusiasm for high density. One, the Seoul's density is about 44,000 person per square kilometer. Residential, yeah. And also you connected that to a higher per capita expenditure when you compare to that. You know, it kind of correlates, though you didn't say it in so many words. And I kind of extend that correlation to depopulation. You know, I'm raising this because the question in my mind is, does this depopulation, does it lead to a suboptimal use of land in the agriculture area? So what we are talking about, GDP's contribution through cities, mobilizing certain kind of resources or producing certain kind of resources. On the other hand, we are suboptimally using land from a food production point of view. I'm asking this again because I've just taught 15 villages in the Kaveri Delta region, and where I'm increasingly seeing lower production and the kind of conversion of agricultural land. So though at one level, certain kinds of resources are important, equally other resources are important, which cannot be compared using monetization as a basis of comparison. And for long, I was thinking that it was Dubai and Shanghai, which is the aspirational model of Indian cities. But hearing from Andy, I think probably Tokyo is the secret ambition. Because with 35 million population, Mumbai can still grow further, another 18 more million, and probably the minister would say, yes, we could. But then that raises a question in my mind, not only in the case of Mumbai, but also the state I come from. Given the dense distribution of settlements, almost every 50 kilometers I could hit a decent town in Tamil Nadu, for sure. Now, why would I want a larger super region when within 60 kilometers I'm going to hit a fairly well-developed town or a city? So it would probably make sense. Again, I'm coming back to the, the polycentric idea of the multiple centers. Because all the experiences that is being presented here are primarily supersized single cities. So I don't know whether that model particularly would work for states with a good distribution of settlements, urban settlements.
Can I open it to the floor, or would you like to speak? Okay. Would you have any questions for or comments from the floor? One? Any others? Okay, because there are four. So, okay. Please introduce yourself.
I'm K.K. Pandey from Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi. I think this session gave very useful feedback for the governance of mega city regions from the angle of role of civil society and further decentralization from town hall up to grassroots level. Whatever we have seen from London, Tokyo, Pune, and Seoul. I would like to recall that in India we have certain systems top-down but are not implemented. For example, Ministry of Environment 3 years back issued end-of-use disposal norms for hazardous waste. Now these cannot be implemented unless local government, city government, and civil society is activated to take up this task. Similarly, National Disaster Management Authority has issued guidelines for urban flooding, I think most of us may not even know that those guidelines have been issued by NDMA. Because there is NDMA, there is State Disaster Management Authority, there is District Disaster Management Authority, but their link with city government is almost nil. Similarly, there is Model Municipal Law, which asks for environmental audit and energy audit. Now, these type of things we have failed to activate. So there is a need to activate the system of engaging civic society in the governance of city regions.
Yeah, I'm Nilima Rizwood.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Nilima Rizwood. I just wanted one more stakeholder which is very important in metropolitan management. We have talked about central, state, and the local and the metropolitan level, and also the NGOs or civil society organizations. But the one which is actually doing a lot of decisions is the real estate market. The land market, which has been buying land actively on the periphery of these large metropolitan areas. In fact, they are deciding where the development will go. There's a huge buying of land and consolidation of land, which decides development and directions of development, and then development decisions follow those. So I think this is one very important stakeholder, especially in case of India, because I think the population will continue to grow and people have known the advantages of these huge conurbations and the economic windfalls out of land decisions. So I just wanted to add this.
Dr. Ravindra? One minute here, Dr. Ravindra.
I think as Mr. Pathak said, I think not much has been spoken about the resources, how resources are raised in the city governments or metropolitan governments, etc. One comment or one suggestion or whatever came from, I think, Seoul. Seoul citizen tax attracted my attention. I think if you can kindly expand a little more on Seoul citizen tax. Who levies the tax? Is it the local metropolitan government or is it the central government? You said centralized, there is a lot of centralization in South Korea as a whole and Seoul and all. And how much and what is the share of, let us say, citizen tax in the whole taxation system of Seoul government?
Gentleman there. Yes.
I'm Ramani Iyer. I'm from CII and Forbes Marshall. Mrs. Vandana Chavan sort of made observations about Pune city. I live in Pune and I 100% concur with why a city like this is not actually governing or doing what's right for the people. So we have a huge problem in all cities of deficit of governance, simply because the elected people, they have no feel for the pulse of the people, nor they have departments which could do planning and detailed work about how to improve a city. Okay, so it's a huge problem. But I also go by what Mr. Ubale said a little while ago about elected mayors. Elected mayors being accountable for the cities. Tamil Nadu has 6 cities where the mayors are elected, including Chennai. I personally went and met the mayor of Chennai in his chamber, and to my surprise, he has nothing to do with Chennai water. He has nothing to do with Chennai water. And I'm told that by a bureaucrat, oh, the mayor has nothing to do with this. What is his function? It is ornamental. Now, this is something which is disturbing me, because on the one end, you have elected representatives who are supposed to govern in other states, who elect mayors from amongst the group. On the other hand, you have mayors who have been directly elected who still have no powers, who still have no functions to deliver what they need to do. Now, this is where I think we need to make a break. But if you look at towns like Chicago, New York City, I've observed what's been done in Chicago. The mayor there was being elected year after year for about 20 years, okay, Mr. Dali. He has done tremendous amount of work in terms of how to improve Chicago city. When they think of a plan, they do it within 6 months. When we think of a plan, we forget it after 2 months. We need to bring about a change in that. That's what I wanted to sort of share.
Mr. Shivaramakrishna, you want to say something? That's the last question.
I was struck by what Marco had said. One of the things we have been trying to...
I don't think everybody can hear you.
Yeah. No, while doing our study, we were wrestling with this problem of delineation. How does really delineation take place? You find in the case of Kolkata and also to some extent Chennai initially, the delineation of the metropolitan area really proceeded on the basis of what was existing already. In the case of Bangalore, they just followed the administrative district. The Bangalore district, and therefore they followed it. It's also interesting that in the case of Mumbai, the delineation of the Mumbai metropolitan area is notified, but changes are not possible unless they are supported by a resolution of the two chambers of the legislature. One of the things that we have been noticing is that the delineation of metropolitan boundaries are sometimes, quite often treated as a matter of executive discretion. So right now in the case of Chennai, there is a debate going on whether Chennai metropolitan region should be 4,000 square kilometers or something different. I'm mentioning this because Marco mentioned ecological considerations. Whether ecological considerations should be an organizing principle for a metropolitan delineation, and if so, how does it work? Suggestion was made that in the case of Jakarta, this has been the case for about 20 years or so. Jakarta has experienced flooding from time to time, and the surrounding areas, have been going on. It is not very clear whether in the case of Seoul and Tokyo, whether that particular dimension, was thought about. Water can be an extremely important envelope, as our study showed, both in the case of Bangalore and Hyderabad, and even to some extent in the case of Chennai. Water has not been used as a defining envelope at all. And as Nilima Risbhat just now observed, in the past 15 years or 20 years, it is making land available for development that has somehow emerged, if not as an organizing principle, at least as a driving force. So I think that is something which this set of international presentations, brings forth. You cannot deal with a metropolitan area merely because somebody has declared it to be so. So there I think a more serious, attention is called for. I think that's a lesson that one would like to take. Incidentally, I don't know whether Gitanjali is around. You're there, okay. Okay, anyway, you have announcements, you can do that later. This was a thought that I wanted to hear.
Okay, I have to stop here because we've passed the time. You're going to meet everybody for dinner, but I want to give them a chance to speak because I'm seeing people leaving, so
I'll just respond to some of those points very quickly. One was about the importance of being the capital in terms of what happens to the governance of the city. In my mind, it's not so much the role of the administrative capital. You have examples like New York and Washington and Ottawa and Toronto, where the separation occurs. What I think is important is the degree to which the city is the economic driver of the whole nation. So if it's the economic driver for the nation, that gives it a very particular and special role and is likely to lead to special treatment and circumstances. So the situation of Tokyo and London, for example, that is the case. And that is perhaps more important than whether or not it's the actual administrative capital. And the idea that there are many countries now in this globalization period talk about picking winners, and your economically most dynamic city is your global winner, so they say. And so resources start getting sucked from the nation as a whole into those particular cities. On a second point was about the way in which different political parties at different levels of government can create complexity between the levels, and that is definitely the case. But what I think you can also see as cities get more strong and the importance of being the leader of a particular city gains, you can see that the elected mayors have become more independent figures. They're not so closely tied to the traditional political parties. And I think in Tokyo, the governor used to be very much a figurehead from the dominant political party, but in more recent times, they've become more independent figures who are well known for other reasons, for literature or acting, and Boris Johnson that we've got in London, he's a popular figure that appeared on TV. That's how people know him. So they're not political party machinery people. And so I think that's a trend that is quite interesting. On the idea of polycentric cities being preferable to dominant cities, I think one of the problems here is the strength of history. That these cities have built up their position over a long time, and it's very difficult to actually counter that historic position that gives them a lot of advantages over other cities. It's interesting to see in the European Union, the strategic plan for the European Union is based upon the idea of polycentric cities and actually encouraging that as a strategy. But of course that is built upon on the history of many European cities being smaller, or if you look at the German cities, Frankfurt and Berlin and Stuttgart and Munich, they are all quite big and important cities, and on the basis of that, a polynuclear kind of approach could be imagined. But there are two cities who are particularly in Europe who are particularly against this polynuclear strategy, and surprise, surprise, it's London and Paris who actually prefer the strong, large city approach. So that's the one on the polynuclear. Maybe just pick out one last one on the delineation. I think as I said earlier, the delineation of London was very clearly going back to an easy boundary. And that easy boundary, originally the GLC, that boundary was the Green Belt. So the Green Belt had created a physical boundary around the city. And that physical boundary became an easy one then to use back in 1965 to create the GLC. And I said in 2000 we actually went back to that because of the ease of legislative arrangements. In the Tokyo case, I'm not quite sure how they delineate their boundaries there. The Tokyo metropolitan government is a fairly tightly drawn boundary. It's not the functional urban region. but there are historical reasons why it's come to that position. And in fact, it has this very strange, as I said before, very strange western extension that goes out from the core city right out into the hills, which doesn't make any rational sense as a boundary. And then the capital city region as a whole is bigger than the functional urban region. And so again, that hasn't been utilized directly as a means of delineating either of those two levels of government.
Thank you for the question about secondary cities. It's a very important one. Japan and Korea actually have a lot in common. Japan, being large and an archipelago, has much more distributed settlement system. But both countries, if you look at the recent census, in Japan, only Tokyo and Nagoya are growing. The rest of Japan is depopulating. And Nagoya is growing because that's where Toyota Motors is. Even the suburbs, the greater Tokyo area, are now depopulating. And the government of Japan is now trying to consolidate towns, bringing people out from places that are just collapsing. Rural Japan and rural Korea, it's not so much a matter of economy. The farmers are doing quite well in Japan, but the town's gone. The last school closed. There's no children. It's a decimation of rural society. But the farmers can always increase in scale, can get more tools. And so while they may not be rich in Japan, because they're able to organize, in fact, they're not poor, most farmers. So that's not it's not a question of productivity, it's lifestyle and life itself. Secondary cities, interestingly enough, there's a very interesting case coming from Japan and Korea. They're realizing that the capital city is not their friend, is no longer their friend. That the capital city just puts branch plants and then moves them to China later. And so Daegu, Busan are really in trouble, but particularly Daegu. Busan, here's very interesting. Busan is now linking up with Fukuoka to create a co-living sphere between Japan and Korea by two city regions. This is a new form of metropolitan governance. And it's amazing historically, given the animosity between the two cultures. Not co-economic, co-living, based on culture, founded on the idea of aging society with cultural talents, exchanges of education, all kinds of things, trying to invent a new economy across the national border. We should watch that. Density, population, yeah, I've already explained that. The citizen tax and all of those earlier policies, we have to remember that it's only 1995 that there's an elected mayor. So anything that happened before 1995 was a puppet mayor appointed by the national government to institute its policies. So all of these things about green belts and all of that were actually national policies implemented locally. Both Japan and Korea have a national land agency that does comprehensive national land use planning. Whether that's implemented or not is another story. Oh, and about the environment, in fact, Seoul's doing quite well in that regard. With democracy, one of the biggest bubbling up of civil society was environmental movements. And they put very strong pressure on government. So Seoul has now got more parks and more sensitivity to areas that will catch the rain and so forth. It's quite interesting. Even Changhae-chang, which is that river, is now become emblematic, even though it's controversial because it's environmentally not so great. But the greening of the city is one of the contributions. So let me conclude by flipping what I said the other way around. I think places like Singapore and Korea provide us with a little conundrum because you have a very strong state and a very weak civil society, but the streets are paved, the water works, everyone has electricity, and there's a national health system, and there's some social housing to boot. And you can't dismiss that automatically. You just can't. But of course, it brings along with it a lot of deficits. But it's a different kind of deficit that sometimes, people talk about poverty and all that. It's a different kind of deficit. It's a deficit of a vernacular city, of an engaged society, of a creative society. And that would take us to a different discourse.
Thank you. So thank you very much. I want to